Hey, quick story for you. What starts as help turns into something you won't see coming. Stick with me to the end, and if you like gripping stories like this, hit subscribe. It helps more than you think. Kala held two blazers up against my chest in the lobby of my building and smiled like it was cute. Not the Navy, she said. That one reads tired. People walking by heard it, and I felt my face heat up while I stood there like a kid getting dressed for picture day. My name is Merrick Vale. I was 37 then, living just outside Washington, District of Columbia, in Arlington, doing my best to look like I had everything handled. For work, I designed fail-safe physical infrastructure for high-security facilities. Power paths, redundancy, access control, risk planning. It was the kind of job where you checked every bolt twice, because lives and money sat on the other side of your decisions. At home, I was somehow the guy who needed help choosing a jacket. Kala would say, "Babe, let me," and I would let her, because arguing in a living room about the story my couch was telling felt dumber than any crisis plan I wrote at work. I met Kala Thornell at a charity launch in Tyson's. Everyone there laughed on cue, like it was part of the ticket price. Kala already had that influencer shine, more creative producer than content girl, and she talked about dinner reservations like they were brand moments. She locked onto me fast. I thought it was chemistry. Looking back, it was scouting. She didn't even look at my face. She looked at the reflection of us in the glass doors, checking the frame for her followers. Quick note, before we keep going, share in the comments which country you're watching from. And let's continue. She moved into my place after about 11 months. It didn't feel like a move. It felt like a tide. One day her makeup bag was on my sink. Then her clothes took half the closet. Then my cabinets got reorganized. My old buddies stopped texting back, and I couldn't even remember the last time I picked the restaurant without getting corrected. When I pushed back, she'd tilt her head and say, "I'm just optimizing us," like I was a system that needed tuning. My workshop was the only room that still made sense. Analog synth modules, pedals, a soldering iron, little labeled drawers, and that sharp metallic smell of flux. I could lose an hour in there and come out calmer. Kala called it my beep closet and laughed, like I was a golden retriever proud of a squeaky toy. Hollis Rowan was the one person who didn't laugh. We'd been friends since college, back when we survived on gas station burritos and bad ideas. He came over, looked at my new photogenic furniture, then looked at me and said, "Man, when did you stop deciding things?" I opened my mouth to defend it. Instead, I grabbed my keys and told him to come with me, and I walked out before Kala could answer for me. On the sidewalk, Hollis grabbed my elbow and steered me toward his truck. "You keep saying it's fine, but you're acting like you need a hall pass to breathe," he said, and I heard anger under it. I told him I didn't want a scene, and he shot back, "The scene is already happening, Merrick. You're just not directing it." My stomach tightened, so I waved him off and walked back inside. Kala met me at the door with that sweet smile that never reached her eyes and two outfits draped over her arms. "I helped," she said, like she'd done me a favor. "Tomorrow is your company dinner, so we need to look intentional." I reached for my usual blazer, and she pulled it back with a small laugh, like I'd missed an obvious cue. I heard myself answer, "Okay, then pick the one you want," because I'd started trading dignity for quiet. That help spread into my calendar and my friends. If I said I was meeting Hollis for a beer, she'd suddenly have a must-attend collab dinner and talk until my plan changed. If I invited old coworkers over, she'd greet them like they were underdressed, then post about protecting your energy once they left, like she'd survived something. People stopped coming around, and she acted like that proved she was right. The apartment shifted to match her feed, piece by piece, until it didn't feel like mine anymore. My solid, comfortable chair vanished and got replaced by a stiff, angled thing that looked great on camera and punished your back. "Your space should elevate you," she said, smoothing the fabric, and I nodded while I searched for a place to sit that didn't hurt. One night, she brought over Sayer Quinns, an art director she treated like a trophy friend. Sayer's eyes slid over me like I was staff, and Kala made it worse with a bright little laugh. "This is Merrick, the brains," she said like she was introducing the reliable dishwasher. Sayer nodded once and went right back to her, and I stood there in my own kitchen holding a drink I didn't want. Then she started pushing into my workshop with little digs that added up fast. "Can you move those wires? They're visually noisy," she'd call from the doorway, and she'd wrinkle her nose at the solder like it was a bad habit. When she told me the smell clung to her clothes and brands notice everything, I actually apologized, and I hated myself for it the second it happened. Not long after, she set up her phone and said, "Let's film a real couple finance talk. It'll be relatable." Then ordered me to pull up my pay statement so she could talk about stable income plus creative ambition. I did it, and the little charges started showing up after that. Styling apps, creator tools, premium scheduling, always framed as our future. At a family cookout, my sister Lark pulled me aside and said, "You look like you're waiting for permission to breathe," and I laughed it off as I grabbed the tongs and flipped the burgers. Smoke from the grill kept sliding into my face, and I pretended that was why my eyes stung. Lark watched me for another second like she wanted to push harder, then someone yelled for more buns, and the moment broke. I slapped another burger down, kept my hands busy, and acted like flipping meat was the same thing as having control of my life. Work didn't let me hide for long. In late May, Lenora Whitby had her assistant tell me to come to her office, and the message came through like a summons, not a request. Lenora was the kind of director who didn't waste words and didn't hand out praise like candy, so my first thought was that something had gone wrong. I walked in, shut the door behind me, and she got straight to it. "The company greenlit a 2-year European Critical Facilities program," she said, tapping a folder like it was a bracket holding the whole thing together. "Luxembourg-based. Kirchberg. I want you leading resilience architecture, power paths, backup chains, access risk. The job is to keep it running when everything goes wrong." My chest wanted to jump, but I kept my face neutral because that's how you survive around someone like Lenora. She leaned back and studied me like she was checking a load rating. "You can run this," she said. "I'm not saying that to be nice." I felt a grin try to break out anyway, and I swallowed it down while my brain ran ahead, already mapping contingencies and timelines. I nodded once and said, "Yes, I can," because anything softer would have sounded like begging. Driving home, I actually rehearsed what I was going to say, which felt pathetic and hopeful at the same time. I pictured Calla looking up from her phone, surprised in a good way, and telling me it mattered. I pictured her saying, "That's huge," and meaning it, like I wasn't just some background prop who brought the stable paycheck into the scene. I held on to that fantasy all the way to the parking garage, like it might protect me. When I walked into the apartment, she had a ring light pointed at a marble cutting board like the cutting board was famous. There were little bowls of berries lined up, and the air smelled like citrus cleaner, and whatever candle she'd decided was on brand that week. She didn't even turn fully toward me, just glanced over her shoulder and said, "Give me 1 minute, I'm almost done with this take." "I got an offer from Lenora," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "Luxembourg, Kirchberg, 2 years leading resilience. Promotion bump, travel support, the whole deal." I waited for the proud face, the hug, anything that felt like I mattered more than her lighting setup. Her face didn't light up at all. It tightened, like I'd told her the landlord raised rent or the internet was down, and then she started talking like she was already in charge of my life over there. "Okay, so we'll need a place with natural light," she said, already scrolling. "And we'll need a second room for storage and filming. Luxembourg is small, but we can make it work if we pick the right look." She kept saying "we," like my career was just a set change for her channel, and I felt that old pressure in my ribs, the one that told me to go along to keep things calm. I tried to say it clean. "I might go alone at first," I said, "just to get established, prove myself, and take pressure off the move." I kept my tone careful, like I was diffusing a device instead of talking to my girlfriend in my own living room. That was when she dropped the smile and showed me the real face. She scoffed, not loud, just sharp, like I'd said something stupid in public. "Be serious," she said. "You can't run a thing like that without me. You'll drop the whole side in a week." She didn't yell it, which somehow made it worse because she said it like a fact, like she was correcting the weather. Then she finished the cut. "You're great at your little technical bubble," she said, eyes back on the screen. "But real life, you fall apart. I manage you." My stomach went cold, and the room went quiet inside my head like a breaker had flipped. I stared at her and heard myself answer, flat and small, "Is that so?" She barely looked up, thumb still scrolling neighborhoods like she'd already won something. I walked past her, went into the kitchen, and sat down at the table with my hands flat on the wood, forcing them to stay still while I opened my notebook and started writing a plan. I kept my notebook open on the kitchen table until my hand cramped, and I wrote like I was at work, not at home. I didn't journal feelings or invent speeches I'd never say. I listed steps, names, dates, and weak points, and every time I heard Calla shifting around in the other room, I pressed harder with the pen and kept going. The next morning, I called Lenora and told her I'd take the Luxembourg assignment. I didn't give her a soap opera or a sob story because Lenora would have shut that down fast. I said, "My home situation is changing and I need confidentiality while I transition," and she answered like I'd asked for a standard safety protocol. "Understood," she said. "I'll loop in relocation and security today." By lunch, it was moving like a machine. Corporate relocation emailed me options, and corporate security set up a secure work channel that never touched my personal accounts, which was exactly what I wanted. They arranged a furnished corporate apartment for my first 10 weeks in Kirchberg, in a building with controlled access. That wasn't paranoia, it was basic risk planning, and Calla loved drop-ins and surprise moments like they were cute instead of invasive. Once the work side was locked, I moved to the home side like I was closing out a site. The apartment lease was in my name, so I filed notice to end it on November 4th, and I booked my flight for the evening of November 3rd. I built it with no overlap and no gray zone, because gray zones are where people like Kala live. There was not going to be any just stay until we talk nonsense, not with my life on the line. I didn't let management pick a replacement tenant because I didn't want random showings or a trail of strangers through my space. I found one myself and met him in the lobby with a printed list of building rules and utility info like I was handing off a project. His name was Dr. Orrin Venter, and he looked exhausted in a quiet, honest way. He didn't ask about my vibe or the lighting in the living room. He asked where the breaker panel was and whether the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning shutoff was labeled, and I liked him immediately. For the move, I hired a professional crew from the company's approved list. Their supervisor was Dugan Cross, 49, built like he could carry a refrigerator alone, and he talked like every word cost money. I met him off-site in a parking lot and handed him instructions that were clear, polite, and non-negotiable. He read them once, nodded, and said, "We can do this clean, Mr. Vale, if nobody freelances." The plan stayed simple because simple holds up under pressure. My personal belongings and my workshop contents got packed for international shipping, logged and sealed like they mattered, because they did. Kala's brand property, clothes, lights, camera gear, product boxes, got packed separately and staged for what she thought was a creator overflow unit for Europe. She'd been talking for months about needing storage under her brand name for write-offs, so I reserved a unit under her legal name, listed her as the only authorized user, and prepaid the first 11 weeks. All she'd have to do was show her identification to claim the access card, and I let her believe it was just smart logistics. At home, I played the part she expected, because that was the safest way to move unnoticed. I acted mildly overwhelmed and slightly dependent, and I nodded while she talked about Euro content arcs and the kind of neighborhoods that would perform. When she said, "You'll thank me when we're booked and busy overseas," I answered, "I'm sure you're right," and I kept my face neutral. She didn't look for deception because she assumed she owned the story, and her confidence made my job easier. I started documenting the same way I would document an access failure at work, boring and complete. I made lists of accounts in my name, pulled lease paperwork, built an inventory, and saved a clean trail of charges that weren't mine. When I told Hollis what I was doing, he didn't laugh or call it dramatic. He just said, "You're building a paper fence, and you should have done it sooner." I didn't argue, and I slid the newest folder into my lockbox and turned the key. The key clicked in the lockbox, and that tiny sound felt like control. The calendar kept sliding toward the move, and Kala got obsessed with appearances, like Europe was a frame she couldn't afford to lose. She watched me the way she watched her screen, hunting for anything that looked off. She booked me a haircut I never asked for and sent the appointment like it was a command. When I said I could handle it, she smiled and told me, "You can, but you won't, and I'm not letting you show up looking careless." She pushed better shoes on me too, and kept repeating that in Europe I had to present like my face was part of her brand kit. Her nerves showed worst when Sayer Quinns came over again. Kala cracked my workshop door, sniffed like she'd found mess, and turned to Sayer with that bright host voice. "We keep this shut," she said, nodding at me. "It reads immature." I had a solder burn on my thumb, and I nodded once out of habit. Then I shut the door myself and didn't apologize. A few nights later, I pulled my statements and finally added up the little charges. Brand tools, paid follower analytics, an editing platform, and a boutique public relations service stacked up fast. Over 4 months, it was $2,180 on my cards, and none of the accounts even carried my name. It wasn't a thriller, it was theft with pretty fonts. I didn't confront her because she lived for a fight she could twist into a story. I separated my money instead, like isolating a bad circuit before it cooked the whole panel. New bank account, new cards, and my automatic payments moved one at a time. I left the old account open just long enough to look normal, then downgraded it and monitored it. Digital separation came right after because she had hooks in everything. Shared streaming, shared shopping logins, delivery apps, and anything else that let her peek into my life or spend like it was for us. I changed passwords, removed devices, and shifted two-factor to a new number that wouldn't activate until my flight was in the air. I kept it boring on purpose, because boring is hard to argue with. I met Hollis for coffee in an ugly strip mall cafe Kala would never step into. He listened, didn't cheer, and finally said, "Good, because this is the first thing you've done for yourself in years." Then he asked, "What do you need from me?" And I gave him tasks, not feelings. Lark became my quiet link back home, and I kept the instructions tight. I told her, "I'm leaving, I'm safe, do not share my details, and if Kala comes sniffing around, keep it short and keep it factual." Lark said she understood, and I believed her because she didn't dress it up. Duggan's crew started packing in waves under the cover story of relocation prep and corporate staging. Calla paced around calling out which jackets mattered most, while Duggan's guys nodded and kept moving. What she didn't see were the manifests, because Dugan kept destination paperwork off-site and used neutral labels like coded numbers and Stage 1 and Stage 2. He looked at me once, quick and flat, and I knew he got it. At night, I packed my synth modules myself, wrapping and labeling each one like it mattered because it did. Calla never asked what I was building. She only said, "Can you keep that smell off my hoodies?" And I sealed another box with tape. I laid the last sealed box against the wall and wiped my hands on my jeans, like tape residue was the biggest problem in my life. The final days moved with that weird calm that shows up when something's about to break, where everything looks normal if you don't stare too hard. Calla floated around talking about launch energy, and I kept moving pieces off the board without giving her anything to grab. November 3rd came fast anyway, like the calendar got sick of waiting. Calla was out at a send-off brunch she planned for herself, and I knew it wasn't really for me because it had filming, hugs, staged tears, and a camera angle for every bite of food. Before she left, she kissed my cheek like she was checking a box and said, "Be home by 5:30 so we can arrive at the airport as a couple." She said it like we were rolling out a product line, not catching a flight. The apartment looked staged, not abandoned, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The walls were bare where her framed prints used to be, the big furniture was gone, and the corners were cleared the way corporate moves get prepped when nobody wants to see the mess. Calla thought the final pickup was part of the logistics plan, scheduled after her brunch so we could do the whole airport thing without chaos in the background. While she performed her send-off, Duggan's crew did the last sweep on schedule, moved the last pieces out, and left the place clean and echoing like a model unit. When I walked through the living room with my suitcase, the air smelled like cleaner and silence, and it hit me in the chest. Not sad, not sweet, just empty in a way that felt like relief instead of loss. I didn't stop to look for memories because I didn't owe the place a goodbye speech, and I certainly didn't owe her one. I opened the storage receipt on my phone and stared at it like it was a final checklist item. Address, unit number, gate code, and a note that the access card was in an envelope under her legal name at the front desk. I took a sharp photo of it and texted it to Calla with no words and no explanation, because any sentence would have turned into a negotiation. The second the message sent, I put the phone back in my pocket and picked up my suitcase handle. I shut the door behind me and locked it, listening for the click like I was sealing a compartment. Downstairs, I dropped the keys and the building fob into the manager's after-hours slot the way the lease handoff instructions required, and I didn't hesitate. The transfer paperwork was already scheduled for the next day, and I didn't leave a letter because letters are something people pick apart until they can make you the villain. The receipt was all she was owed, and even that was more than she deserved. At the airport, I checked my bag and walked straight to an electronics recycle bin like I'd done it 100 times. I tossed my old phone in, and it hit the bottom with a dull clunk, and the sound made me feel stupidly satisfied because it was so undramatic. On the plane, once we were moving, I powered on the phone tied to my new number and felt the space open up in my head. Nobody could reach me unless I allowed it, and that was the first real quiet I'd had in years. Luxembourg hit me like quiet water when I finally landed, clean streets and smaller scale and fewer random noises fighting for attention. My corporate place in Kirchberg was plain and secure, and the first night the silence felt loud enough to press on my ears. I slept anyway, hard and deep, like my body didn't trust it would get another chance. The next morning, I went to work and did the job, and it was almost easy compared to what I'd been doing at home, measuring every step and performing gratitude for being controlled. I kept one old email address alive as a catch basin, because cutting every line at once can make people do reckless things. I didn't read what came in right away, even when the notifications started stacking up like a blinking panel. I turned off alerts, closed the laptop, and set it face down on the counter. 2 days after I landed, I flipped the laptop back open, and the old email account lit up like a warning panel. The subject lines came in stacked, like somebody kept slamming their fist on a doorbell. Calla started with rage first, all caps and typos, accusing me of stealing her life like I'd robbed a museum. Then she swung into pleading, then into threats, the same pattern she used in person, just preserved in black and white. I didn't answer any of it. I read enough to understand the rhythm. Then I stopped reacting and started collecting, because that was the only language this situation respected. The ugliest part was realizing she wasn't shocked I left. She was shocked she couldn't reach into my life and pull me back like a cord. The door scene, the one I wasn't there for, only made sense because 3 sources lined up without trying. Calla's emails referenced the speech I practiced, which told me everything about what she expected. She showed up ready to perform a camera-ready reconciliation, the kind where I apologized, and she forgave me in good lighting. Instead, the person who opened the door wasn't me. Dr. Oren Venner texted me directly, short and clean, like a guy who hated drama and respected facts. Your former partner came to the apartment tonight and tried to come in. I told her she can't. Please advise if you need anything documented. I stared at that message for a second, feeling a sharp, mean relief that I wasn't the one standing in that doorway getting pushed around. Later, he sent a longer follow-up, still calm, still matter of fact. He said she tried to push past him like she belonged there, and he didn't escalate or get theatrical about it. He stood in the doorway and told her he had a signed lease, and if she didn't leave, he'd call building security. Then he added one line that made my skin go tight. His doorbell camera caught the whole interaction. That detail mattered because it turned her performance into evidence. Kala's emails shifted fast once she realized the door wouldn't open. How dare you turned into "you're unstable" like she was flipping filters on a photo. She wrote that I'd had a breakdown, that I needed help, that I was being manipulated by coworkers, because if she couldn't control the facts, she attacked the person holding them. It was the same move she used on me at home, just louder now because she didn't have my face in front of her to manage. Then Kip Maddox piled on. Kip was her content manager and her muscle, the guy who loved speaking for her like he was hired to do her yelling. He left voicemails on the old number, and I listened to them once, just to log the tone. "You're a coward for disappearing like this," he said, and then, "real men don't vanish when things get hard." When that didn't work, he switched to fake friendly. "Just talk to her for 5 minutes, man, and we can fix this." Like 5 minutes with Kala ever stayed 5 minutes, and like I owed either of them my oxygen. Nadine Thornell, Kala's mother, sent a long guilt email to that same Catch Basin account. It was thick with, "After all we did for you," and "You ruined my daughter's life," and it read like a script she'd been waiting to use. There was no mention of the charges on my cards, the insults, the control, or the way Kala treated me like a malfunctioning appliance. It was a neat rewrite where Kala was the victim, and I was the defective product that stopped working. Lark reached out carefully because she understood this wasn't gossip, it was security. She said, "I heard she showed up again the next day and tried to talk her way into the building," and then she added, "I didn't see it myself, so treat it as not confirmed, but it fits what she's doing." I appreciated that honesty more than any comfort line, because it told me my sister was thinking like an adult, not a fan. I didn't argue with any of them, and I didn't correct their stories, because that would have fed the machine. I forwarded Oren's texts, the emails, and notes about the voicemails to corporate security in one tight packet, labeled and time-stamped, and I kept my own replies at 0. Then I hit send and closed the laptop again. I pushed the laptop aside and went back to work like nothing had happened, because that was the only way to stay steady. The building smelled like clean paint and hot coffee, and my badge beeped the same as always, like my life hadn't just been yanked sideways. I was settling into a set of drawings when a message came through. Lenora wanted me in a small conference room now. Lenora didn't waste time with small talk, and she didn't soften her face to spare my feelings. She shut the door, sat across from me, and slid a printed incident summary over the table like it was a safety report. "Security flagged a call to our United States office switchboard," she said. "Someone claiming to be your spouse reported a family medical emergency and demanded your location and travel details." The paper had timestamps, notes, and a clean line that said the caller got angry when they refused, then hung up. I felt something hot climb up my neck, the kind of anger that didn't need shouting to be real. Lenora tapped one line with her finger. "We have the recording," she said, and she didn't ask if I wanted to hear it because we both knew the answer mattered. I listened, and the voice was Kala's, high and shaky and convincing, like she'd put it on the way she put on everything else, a costume meant to get her through the door. That was the moment I got truly angry, not just irritated or tired. She used family emergency the way she used my money and my time as leverage because she wanted access and didn't care what lie she had to wear to get it. Lenora watched me for a beat and asked, "Do you want us to move from monitor to formal action?" I didn't hesitate because hesitation was what got me controlled in the first place. "Yes," I said. "Move to formal action and lock it down." Kala didn't come at me directly after that, at least not in a way I could ignore with filters and silence. She tried to regain control publicly, which was always her favorite move, because it turned private pressure into a crowd. A video popped up with her face framed just right, voice trembling just right, talking about being abandoned and stranded and how she didn't know what was going on. She hinted I was unstable without saying it clean, like she wanted people to connect the dots for her. And she didn't name my company at first, but made it easy to guess. The whole point was reputation pressure, like she could squeeze my job until I crawled back. Corporate legal responded the way big organizations respond when someone pokes them, cold and factual and brief. I got copied on a formal cease and desist addressed to Kala and her management, and it was one page that hit like a hammer because it didn't argue with her feelings at all. It stated I'd been relocated under confidentiality protocols, that no spouse status existed, that harassment attempts were recorded, and that any further contact would be treated as harassment and interference with corporate security. There was no, please understand, just boundaries, ink, and consequences. Around the same time, my financial audit caught another twist, and it made my stomach tighten in a different way. 2 new charges had been attempted after I left, one for a public relations retainer and one for a brand retreat deposit, and both bounced because I'd moved my accounts. That told me she wasn't heartbroken and she wasn't confused. She was trying to keep spending like the machine hadn't lost its power source. I filed the attempted charges with the rest of my documentation and kept my mouth shut because she didn't deserve a reaction. She kept trying doors anyway. Security sent me another time-stamped log showing someone had contacted a subcontractor's coordinator claiming to be my partner handling relocation and tried to pull information. It didn't work, but it showed the pattern plain as day because Calla treated people like doors she could talk her way through. I stopped calling it drama in my head because drama sounds optional, like you can laugh it off. This was an access problem, and I handled access problems by tightening controls, documenting attempts, and refusing to negotiate with the intrusion. Back at my desk, I opened the secure channel and typed a short directive to security and legal, then I hit send. I watched the secure channel for a moment after I hit send, then forced myself back into the work. A live site didn't care about my personal mess, and I liked that honesty. About 8 weeks into the assignment, corporate counsel pinged me with a subject line that made my jaw tighten. Formal demand. The attached letter was addressed to them, not me, and it felt like Calla's hand on my throat anyway. She demanded compensation for career impact, brand partnership loss, and shared property claims, all wrapped in that confident legal tone that tries to make nonsense sound inevitable. She even listed my synth modules as joint creative assets because a few had shown up blurry in the background of her videos. I didn't write back, and I didn't vent to anyone who could turn it into gossip. Counsel called me on the secure line and said, "Merrick, do not contact her directly and do not respond outside this channel." I told them, "I'm not interested in talking, I'm interested in closing this," and I started feeding them documents like I was building a case file at work. Lease solely in my name, notice dates, the storage contract in her legal name, the prepaid receipts, and the statement trail showing her subscriptions and tools billed to my cards without my authorization. It wasn't a thriller, it was just a pattern with numbers. The unexpected witness turned out to be the sharpest blade. I asked Oren Venter if he'd be willing to put in writing what happened at his door, and I expected him to say no because nobody wants to get dragged into somebody else's mess. He surprised me with a short reply that was all spine and no drama. "I will confirm what I personally observed," he wrote, including that my doorbell camera recorded the interaction. That was it, and it was perfect because courts take calm facts from tired professionals seriously. Counsel's response went out a few days later, and they let me read it before it left the building. It didn't insult Calla, and it didn't beg her to be reasonable, because people like her hear both as attention. It clarified there was no marriage, no shared tenancy rights, and no legal basis for support claims, period. It documented her attempted information grabs through corporate channels, attached the timestamped security incident logs, and referenced the family medical emergency call recording without making it sound like a scandal. Then it asked politely whether she wanted to proceed knowing these records would be introduced. That's where the hidden needle landed, because the letter also flagged the unauthorized charges as potential misuse. It didn't accuse her like a tabloid headline. It stated the concern with dates and totals, including the $2,180 that had piled up under brand tools, analytics, editing platforms, and public relations services. Reading it in that legal language made the whole situation shift from sad breakup to pattern of exploitation, and I could almost feel her grip slipping. Within 10 days, her attorney went quiet, and the silence said more than any threat email. Then a short withdrawal notice came through, dry as dust, with no apology and no explanation, just retreat. After that, I only heard scraps through Lark's telephone chain, and I treated it like scraps. She said sponsors cooled off once screenshots of the cease and desist and the logged emergency call started circulating in brand group chats. She said Kip backed away when he realized his name sat in harassment logs, and Calla had to downsize, then crash with Nadine while she posted healing content and fought Kip over storage fees. I didn't ask Lark for more details, and I didn't gloat because none of it changed what mattered. I printed the withdrawal notice, punched it into my binder behind the security logs, and locked the drawer with a click. The drawer clicked shut, and the sound felt final in a way my old life never did. I walked back into the open office, pulled up the next risk register, and let the routine carry me. Luxembourg didn't fix me, but it gave me quiet enough to hear myself again, and that quiet didn't ask permission. Work stayed demanding in a clean, honest way. If a power path had a weak link, you named it, you corrected it, and you signed off when it met spec. Nobody pouted because you didn't validate their truth, and nobody moved the goalposts just to keep you chasing. I started showing up early, not to prove anything, but because it felt good to own my morning. On a Saturday, I followed a flyer to a small makerspace in Belval, the kind of place that smelled like dust, solder, and burnt coffee. A few guys sat around folding tables, trading parts, and arguing about signal noise like it mattered more than politics. I brought one of my modules in a plastic case, set it down, and said, "I built this for control voltage routing, and it's picky about grounding." A guy with grease on his hands leaned in and said, "That is solid work, and you did not overcomplicate it," and I felt my shoulders drop. For the first time in years, I talked about what I liked without scanning anyone's face to see if it was acceptable. We passed around an oscilloscope, argued about noise, and nobody tried to turn it into content. When I left, my hands smelled like metal, the coffee tasted like it gave up, and I liked that more than fancy dinners. The change wasn't instant, and I didn't pretend it was. The first month I caught myself hesitating over stupid things, like which shirt to wear to the office or whether a chair looked right in my living room. I'd stand there too long, hearing Cala's voice in my head, and then I'd feel that calm heat rise when I remembered her line, "You'll drop the whole site in a week." I was standing in Luxembourg. The site was running, and nothing had dropped except her grip on me. I set my apartment up for function, not a feed. I bought a plain table that didn't photograph well and a chair that didn't punish my back. I built a proper bench again, bolted it to the wall, and hung a few synth builds on shelves like they were what they were, work I was proud of. Nobody called them toys, and nobody demanded they match a color palette. Months later, a new email popped up from an address I didn't recognize. It said, "Can we talk like adults? Short and sweet, designed to hook me." I didn't answer because I'd already talked like an adult by leaving, documenting, and refusing to feed the machine. I deleted the message, turned on my soldering iron, and started building the next module. Hold on, can I ask you something real before you click away? If you've got the hype feature, tap it to support this video and help it reach more people. Then please subscribe and hit like because it's one click and it matters a lot to us. And leave a comment, even just good story, but also tell me this. If you realize someone loved controlling you more than they loved you, would you disappear quietly like I did, or would you stay and fight it out?